for the leasing of land to the Rotary Club Trust, essentially for a play park which will also accommodate children with disabilities. I recall, Mr. Speaker, when this resolution was debated in 2015, I was an opposition MP then. The records would show that I would have spoken in a positive manner on this issue. I first wish to commend the Rotary movement for the initiative that it has taken. I think it began in around 2010. This is a long-time project that service organization had for the people of Barbados, and specifically for children with disabilities, an extremely vulnerable group. The Rotaries, just like the Lions, of which I'm a member, Kiwanis, Optimists, play an extremely essential role in our society and in our social and economic development. A government, as was said by the Honourable Minister of Housing who presented it, correctly said, can't do everything. And we need organizations, service organizations, non-governmental organizations, such as the Rotaries, to assist in our efforts to make life better for all our people. In fact, in Canada, I know certainly about 10 years ago, it was estimated that service organizations, non-governmental organizations, charitable organizations contribute about 7% to the gross national product and domestic product of Canada. And it would be interesting for a study to be carried out in Barbados, perhaps by the University of the West Indies, on how much these organizations contribute through volunteerism to the gross national product of Barbados. And of course, we have, since this administration came into office, added to that in terms of give back by students at tertiary level, in a lot of cases assisting these organizations and charitable organizations in this cause. I commend, sir, the Honourable Minister who led this debate this morning. He spoke with tremendous passion. I think he revealed for the first time that he also grew up in a household that had a relative, close relative with a disability, sir, and spoke with the passion that brings, and also as a Rotarian. And then, of course, the Honourable Minister in charge of disabilities, who spoke as a true social policy expert, was speaking as someone who has brought tremendous passion and dedication and drive to the cause of advancing the lives of people with disabilities since he's become a minister. I also wish to commend the Council for the Disabled, sir, as the Honourable Housing Minister did, and the Honourable Minister for People's Empowerment for the role that they have played, that Council has played in this initiative. I was a director of the Council of the Disabled, sir, when this initiative would have been driven. I was a director between 2013 and 18, so I know of the efforts made by the Council in this regard. And you've given me permission, sir, to call names. I sought and obtained such permission. Ms. Rosanna Truder, sir, has to be commended in this regard, long-time administrative manager of the Council, in helping us reach where we are today. This also speaks towards the issue of tax deductions for persons who contribute to charitable organizations, registered charitable organizations, service organizations which are registered, and they have to register under the Companies Act for donees to get this benefit. And this administration would have reinstituted that income tax provision whereby donations to a registered charity are tax deductible up to 10% of your accessible income for the year. And that's commendable, sir. Something that if the administration could find its way to increase on, I'm sure that it will do in the future. So this presents an opportunity, of course, to speak on the work of the National Advisory Committee to guide the establishment of a commission to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. And first want to say, of course, the United Nations have already deemed as its theme for International Day next year, 2023, for persons with disabilities as transformative solutions for inclusive development, the role of innovation in fueling an accessible and equitable world. And of course, this resolution, what we are doing today, is part of that, because persons with disability, it is accepted, so it's beyond argument, are among the most vulnerable people, not only in our country, but in our region as a whole, and perhaps in a lot of the wider world. Caribbean Development Bank, in a study in 2017, identified that a significant portion of the poorest 5% in Barbados, and as I said, throughout its member states in the region, are persons with disabilities. And a society, a caring government such as what we are, must treat towards the most vulnerable. As Mahatma Gandhi said, a society has to be judged by how it treats to its most vulnerable people. And this administration is making and continues to make a commendable effort, sir, in treating towards improving the lives of persons with disabilities, and none more so than the formation of the National Advisory Committee, of which I have the honor to be chairperson. Prime Minister, on the 27th day of this year, when the Honourable Prime Minister, when cabinet ministers, members of Parliament, members of the Senate were sworn in at State House, said that she was going to, and the cabinet was going to establish this National Advisory Committee. The resolve of the Honourable Minister for People's Empowerment to have that done in the shortest possible time, realized the fact that by 1st of June, this committee was indeed established. And so I, in the, almost 6 months of the duration of the life of this committee, a tremendous amount of work has been done. I don't know that there have been many committees that in such short a time have been able to have engaged the public to such an extent that this committee has been able to, sir. And so I have to give credit to the members of the committee, sir. As I said, you have given me permission to call names. The Deputy Chairman, former President of the Senate, Kerry-Ann Ifill, SCM, sir, has been a tremendous task. But Kerry-Ann, I mean, is a treasure, unique, sir. And she shows the possibilities, what is possible when people with disabilities, blind persons in her case, because people with disabilities are not a homogeneous group, get the opportunity so they can achieve as much more than people who don't have any patent inability. Senator Andre Lee Boyce, so, a tremendous young man, 2-3 university degrees, outstanding individual, member of the committee. And sir, I have to commend Cabinet for agreeing to the choice of such a committee, sir. I would have recommended all the members except one. If I had thought of that one person, I would have added him on too, sir. Janelle Odell, first blind attorney at law in this country. Someone who, despite her visual impairment, sir, taught her class at law school. distinction, first-class honors in law. Again, showing the possibilities of someone with a disability. Joanne Higgs, communication specialist, tremendous help in advising on public relations and relationships with the media to the committee. Larry Smith, Silk, of course, assisting in terms of the legal effects and on the mental health and challenges issue, autism issues. Granville Carter, sir, 6-time Calypso champion in contest for the blind in this country, 6 successive times, worthy of a national honor, sir. Sonia Rollins, head of the Derek Smith Vocational School, one of the schools mentioned by the Honourable Member for St. George South as a school that treats towards people with disabilities in this country. And Mr. John Hollingsworth, who is director of the National Disabilities Unit, and that organization doing yeoman's services in this area with limited human resources. So this committee, sir, grounded with the quality individuals such as those that I named, and every member of that committee either has a disability, sir, or has a close relative in terms of a child, or in my case, a sister with a disability. So we all know disability as a lived experience. And this is important in terms of the enthusiasm and the drive that has gone into the works of this committee, sir. So we initially met with all the ministries, each and every ministry and major statutory corporation, major government department we have engaged in. Within the first 6 weeks, July, that was up to the middle of August. And I again commend all the members of cabinet, sir, who led their ministerial delegations in meeting with the committee. They had their top policy advisors, permanent secretaries, and senior managers at the meeting. In each and every case, a minister attended, except in one case where that minister was out of the island on government duties. And that was a meeting that we combined anyway, as we did with some ministries. So, there was still ministerial representation at the meeting. And that showed me, that showed the committee, that showed people with disabilities that this is an administration that truly cares and is not only willing to just form a committee and speak on an issue, but to act in that regard. And for example, every minister who I put the question to during the meetings, look, people with disabilities have to be involved not only in terms of the socio-economic life, but more involved in the socio-economic life of this country, the cultural life, sporting, recreational, but also at policy making level, have to be given that opportunity. And would you be willing, of course, to have people with disabilities, more people with disabilities on your the statutory boards, committees, commissions that come under your ministry? And all the ministers, of course, said yes, they would be. Now, that takes being informed of who are suitable, are worthy to be on statutory boards, and there are many such people in this country who can, if given the opportunity, serve at that level and be part of the policy-making machinery of this country, and obviously making decisions about themselves and their own lives. So I would call on members of Parliament to give names to your colleagues on persons who could serve. When I was minister, sir, I certainly would have ensured that on the committees that I had responsibility for, there were some persons with disabilities. So this is one of the key areas, sir, that, and the Honourable Minister for People's Empowerment spoke to it. He said that he wants to know where every person with a disability lives in Barbados. And that is certainly the ideal, sir. Part of that is going to involve registration of persons with disabilities, and that is in the draft bill. Optional registration of persons with disabilities if you're an adult. I mean, you can't compel an adult to register with the National Disabilities Unit, or when the act is passed, it'll be the commission, but certainly children with disabilities will have to be registered. So, and this is key, and I would certainly wish to urge persons with disabilities to register with the authorities so that the authorities know who you are. Certainly in my constituency, sir, I would wish to say I know virtually every person with disabilities, but of course that is my interest in knowing them. But sir, as I said, this has implications in terms of being able to assist persons with disabilities as much as we can, even in terms of the extremely notable and significant act 3 months ago by the Honourable Minister of Housing to have Cabinet agree that 10% of housing, state housing or housing by state-affiliated companies in this country going forward, 10% of the housing solutions must go to persons with disabilities, sir. And that alone is transformative, sir, if nothing else, because that was first mooted 22 years ago when on May the 20th, 2000, the Green Paper, of which the Honourable Minister mentioned, was laid in this Parliament. That was first where the 10% allocation of housing for persons with disabilities came up. But it was never implemented. In fact, it dropped out of the White Paper 2 years after, as that paper was laid in Parliament. But to make this now a lived reality and a realised proposal, again, we have to know who are the people with disabilities that need housing, so that the state can accommodate them. And part of that, of course, the major part is registration. That is why, sir, it's so important. I mean, tomorrow the committee is meeting for the second time with the Electoral Boundaries Commission, because there has apparently been slow registration of persons with disabilities for the Trident card, under which, within that card, you could register your disability as well, and therefore it's important for us to try and get this right in terms of registration of persons with disabilities. After meeting with all the ministries and major government departments, sir, the committee also met with the labour movement, the business community, employers confederation, Chamber of Commerce, with United Nations organizations here in Barbados. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Social Partnership reached out to us and said the Social Justice Committee wishes to meet with you to see the work you're doing and the faith-based organizations, and we therefore met with them as well, sir. We met, sir, with the opposition political parties, because there is no political divide on this. There can't be any political divide on this. Disabilities doesn't say, I can give you this because you're a BLP, but I'm not going to give you this because of a Dem. You're a Dem. So it was important to involve the opposition parties, and I must commend them for agreeing to come and meet with us. In terms of the LP, it was their social committee, sir. And in terms of Bishop Atherley, he came himself, sir. And the bishop gave suggestions which were on par with our thinking. It showed he has given a lot of thought on the issue, as I know, because we've spoken on this issue many times when we were in the same political party, sir. So I know his thought process. And there is no political divide, I wish to say, on the need, the undoubted need and desire to improve the lives of persons with disabilities in this country. We would obviously, sir, have met with persons with disabilities themselves, the organizations of which there are 21 under the umbrella of the Council for the Disabled, which serve persons with disabilities in Barbados. And we met on 3 occasions with them, dividing up the Pacific areas, dealing with different aspects of the cabinet portfolios on each occasion. We would have met as well to, sir, 3 town hall meetings, inviting all the public to meetings. One in the north, one in south, one in Bridgetown, sir. In addition, we invited, or even now, the public can write in memorandum on proposals and legislative provisions which they believe should inform ultimately the Cabinet's consideration in considering the draft legislation and the policy proposals, sir. And many persons have done that. And we specifically wrote organizations such as the Rotaries, the Lions, inviting them to submit memorandum, Bar Association, BAMP, the Homeless Society. So this has been an extremely wide-ranging public consultation in the 6 months of the existence of this commission. No one can say they haven't been given the opportunity to meet and to engage the National Advisory Committee, which has been established in some form or another. Our consultations have shown, sir, that, look, we have come a far way from the days when people with disabilities, as we know, and as you know, sir, you're a social policy person, were hidden away in a house and were not brought out in public in a lot of cases because their family, in a lot of cases, considered them an embarrassment, sir. We've come a far way from that, sir. But we still have a far way to go. What the Cabinet has done in establishing this committee has taken a big step, sir, towards the recognition that there's a need for greater participation of people with disabilities in all aspects of this country, that they have a right to, as citizens of this country and residents of this country, to equal treatment, that they have a right not to be discriminated against, to be included in all aspects of this country, and to be able to have accessibility in all definitions of that term to all areas of this country, sir. And therefore, the Ministry of Public Works also has to be commended for making some car park spaces in Bridgetown, sir, some within a big stone's distance from here, for the first time in this country, something that the Council for the Disabled, People with Disabilities, were calling for from 2015, when over 10,000 people signed a petition and presented it to government, calling for car park spaces for people with disabilities in this country. So, and a call has to go out for people who do not have disabilities to recognize that the parking spaces reserved for people with disabilities are what they are. For people with disabilities or who are either driving, because that is possible, sir, as the Honourable Member for St. George South spoke about his cousin being a driver, sir. And I have experienced that too, sir, when I was in Canada. A friend of my family, she drove me no fingers. She was one of those babies born in the 60s. You remember, mothers took a tablet that they thought would help, and their children, a lot of them were born without limbs. But I have experienced that, sir. And that's the possibilities that they have. There must be no limitation for people with disabilities in any aspect once they have the capacity to perform, sir. They must be included in everything. And the car park spaces are to be reserved for people with disabilities. And during our meetings, certainly, sir, with the business community, we call on them to be more vigilant to prevent people without disabilities abusing this position, because it is the law of the land and subject to fines for parking in car park spaces reserved for persons with disabilities. So I wish to speak about the role of the Law Reform Commission, sir, and the Honourable Member for St. Michael South mentioned it, but I will also mention it, sir. The role of the Law Reform Commission, headed by Sir David Simmons, sir, whose name, as we know, last Friday, very worthily and deservedly, sir, is now on the judicial complex, along with name of another former Attorney General, Sir Henry Ford, both members, long-standing members of this Parliament, sir, in the case of Sir David, also a former Chief Justice, sir. And the Law Reform Commission recognized that we have a serious deficiency in our legislative framework in this country in not having comprehensive disabilities legislation. All we have, sir, of course, is the Constitution, which would give generally rights, human and fundamental rights to all citizens of Barbados. We have the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Act, passed in this Parliament in 2020, which speaks as one of the categories of persons not to be discriminated against in terms of employment as people with disabilities, but there's no comprehensive legislation. And Sir David, sir, would have contacted the Honourable Minister for People Empowerment and myself after he heard of the establishment of the National Advisory Committee, and said, we will retain a legal consultant for you to draft the bill, to draft the disabilities legislation. So, and you know, the Lord works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. The stars, it's like the stars all coming together in alignment at the same time, because that has been a tremendous benefit, sir. So the Law Reform Commission retained Dr. Jason Haynes, one of the brightest academic minds in this Caribbean. Vincentian, born, married to a Barbadian, again, top of his class, first class honors, distinction in everything. He did now a lecturer at the University of Birmingham, in the recent past, Deputy Dean of the University of the West Indies Law Faculty here. And he drafted us a bill, as he had done, sir, in his home country last year in St. Vincent, in drafting disabilities legislation bill. He had experience in the area because he was also part of the process of the report the Honourable Housing Minister spoke of today, the Access to Justice report by Impact Justice, which was published in December last year, so he was part of that too. So he has a platform, and we had a draft bill, sir, which the committee has obviously looked at and tightened up on many proposals. And this Parliament was told today of the all-day session that was held last week, Wednesday, with all the stakeholders in the community of people with disabilities and the organizations, as well as officers from the Chief Parliamentary Council that ultimately, of course, would have overview on the draft bill. So two of the parliamentary councils, certainly one senior parliamentary council, were present as well at this all-day meeting. And the final draft, sir, is scheduled to be presented to us by the 5th of December, in 2 weeks' time, sir, because The committee initially has been given a 6-month tenure by Cabinet, which ends the end of November, sir. So we are putting the final touches on a report on the work of the committee so far, and the broad proposal, sir, which will inform that report to present to the Honourable Minister for People Empowerment next week by Independence Day, sir, final day of our tenure. And it is up to Cabinet to see if the tenure bit should be extended, because the policy document which will be required to go to the Cabinet for its consideration along with the draft bill is being worked on, so probably won't be ready until the 3rd week of January by Professor Drain Devenish, an outstanding Barbadian social policy and social scientist, sir, who has recently done the elderly report for the same Ministry of People Empowerment. I believe he's also involved in the sports policy initiative as well. So this committee has got top resource persons and experts to assist it in this all-important concept and in this significant work that it is doing. Sir, there is no doubt that people with disabilities, given the opportunity to realize their full potential, can do as well as anyone in this country. But they have traditionally been disadvantaged, sir, because, as was mentioned by the 2 previous honourable members, sir, when you have a situation in Barbados where 90%, sir, of people with disabilities, adult of working age, are either unemployed or not self-employed, you have a problem, because that represents 10 times the average nationally in Barbados. And it is therefore the duty of any government, sir, that cares such as this, to reduce and to treat to that clear problem, sir, where people with disabilities are not given the opportunity to work in this country. And we again call on, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael South has done consistently within the recent past, call on people, employers to give people with disabilities an opportunity, sir. And yes, since this committee has been formed, yes, there have been employers who have been reaching out to people with disabilities to see about employment for them, sir. And the record shows that the business places, entities that have given people with disabilities an opportunity for employment are generally very pleased about them. They say they concentrate on the work, they're not gossiping, they're not on Facebook or on a cell phone all day, because they are tremendously happy to be given the opportunity to work, but obviously within their capacity, sir, because people with disabilities are not asking for any handout or any tokenism, sir. This is their right, and we're asking for them to be involved in work that they're capable of doing, sir. And COVID, 2 years of COVID, sir, harsh COVID that we've recently come out, has shown that people can work remotely, sir, because that is what a large percentage of Barbados were doing for a significant part of 2 years. So people with disabilities can work remotely. Many of them, sir, are better with information technology and computers, certainly, than I am, sir. So there is that opportunity for them. There's provisions, sir, in the draft bill for retrofitting public buildings, which treat towards persons with disabilities, that invite the public, that there's proposals that public buildings will have to be retrofitted to allow accessibility for persons with disabilities, and that certainly buildings that are built going forward, sir, such as the Judicial Centre, which we heard mentioned today by the Honourable Housing Minister as being accessible to persons with disabilities, that has to be the norm, sir. And when we met with the Town Planning Office, we said so. So, for example, multi-storey buildings, the elevators ought to have braille on them as well, or devices that the deaf can see and therefore be guided by. That is so in some of our government buildings, such as the Baobab Towers, I know have that, sir, but other government buildings don't. And that has to be the type of engagement that the government must lead in terms of making Barbados all-inclusive for persons with disabilities. When we met with tourism, sir, and I commend the Honourable, well, she's no longer the Honourable Senator who was Minister of Tourism then. She's, of course, now Minister in Small Business, but she realized that that we do not cater enough to tourists who have disabilities. And even from an economic viewpoint, that can be a major market, because a lot of persons with disabilities in the developed countries are multimillionaires, even if from the settlements which they have received as a result of the incident which caused their disability. And if we were to make Barbados fully accessible to people with disabilities, that is a market, major market, possibly for people with disabilities to come to Barbados and enjoy themselves to the best that they can do. This particular resolution speaks towards the environment and sports and physical activity, so very important. And sir, I know the committee had an opportunity to speak towards the sporting policy for persons with disability that the Honourable Minister for Sports and Community Development is now crafting, and I believe is near finalization. And right now, of course, there's a para-badminton tournament going on in Colombia, which Barbados is being represented by 2 badminton players. And we have to encourage and give reward, just reward, to people with disabilities who are involved in competitive sporting engagements, just as we reward people without disabilities in the normal sporting engagement and the athletes. So, education of children with disabilities is major, because you're not going to vastly reduce the unemployment figure of persons with disabilities without education for better education opportunities for children with disabilities. And as I said, sir, it is perhaps that the stars have come together, because the Ministry of Education, as we all know, is in the midst of looking at education reforms, and part of that education reform must include children with disabilities. And 2 members of the committee, the National Advisory Committee, would have served in some capacity on the education reform subcommittees, and would have engaged the ministry on how best now to include children with disabilities into mainstream education, sir. Because, and this is what this resolution is about as well, permitting the opportunity for children with disabilities to come together with children who do not have disabilities, sir, because that's the only way. It can't be a case where children with disabilities are excluded and are made to feel that they are different because of a disability, and are therefore subject to bullying, for example, as we heard, as the Honourable Minister for People Empowerment said, we heard about at the town hall meeting, sir. And the coming together of children with disabilities within the school environment must happen to a greater extent than is now. And it can't be a case where even though we have education, free education, quote unquote, as of right, in this country by legislation for over 60 years, starting in the 1950s with certain schools and culminating in the 60s. But yet the reality is that parents of children with disabilities, majority of whom, sir, are struggling financially, have to pay in some respects for their children to be educated. In a lot of cases, that education may be subsidized by the foreign trust companies, charitable companies that are here, the Sandy Lane Trust, the Maria Holder Trust, for example, the Derek Smith Trust, Tanglewood, sir. But this needs to be as right, because children with disabilities have the right to free education just like anybody else. But that can't be only words, it has to be translated into reality. And it is incumbent on us, sir, as members of Parliament, as representatives of the people, to have this happen, sir. All of this is not going to happen overnight, sir. There are going to be some proposals in terms of policy that can be brought into effect immediately, sir, on submission and after Cabinet's consideration and approval of what Cabinet feels should be approved, sir. But there will be some that will need medium-term measures, maybe to come into force in 2-3 years' time. There's some that may take a longer time, sir, to come into effect, sir, because Rome wasn't built in a day. But a start has to be made to make this most vulnerable group of people be able to participate and be included in all aspects of life, even in the political process, sir. As I said, we're meeting with the Electoral Boundaries Commission tomorrow, because there have been many cases in the past where people with disabilities say that they are not allowed to vote independently, where they wish that an electoral officer may intercede, sir. That is the truth. There have been reports on that and say, well, I can vote for you, I can cast an X for you, but sir, I defend the right of any person with disabilities, once they are capable of voting independently, to so vote. Whether the voting be D or independent, sir, that is their constitutional right. This party fought long and hard over 70 years ago, Right Excellent Sir Grantley, to enshrine the right of every Barbadian citizen and resident, by definition, to be able to vote freely and fairly for who they want to vote, sir. So this is what is at stake here, sir, within the wider debate here today. Cultural involvement, sir, must be a cultural policy to advance people with disabilities in this country, because that is part and parcel of what makes us all, sir. And when we met with the Ministry of Culture, sir, and again I commend Senator in the other place who has responsibility for that now. We spoke perhaps of funding by UNESCO in this cause to assist us in this regard, because there's developmental funding available for us to advance in this area. And the issue too, of course, is that Barbados, we are looked at as a high-level middle-income earning country, and therefore not accessible to some developmental funding, a problem and dilemma which the Honourable Prime Minister speaks about in almost every forum that she speaks at internationally, sir. But it has to be that we treat to vulnerable groups too. And certainly in the meetings we had with the United Nations Development Programme, for example, they said on principle they would be willing to assist in what the Honourable Member for St. Michael South spoke about, the detection and identification early among 4-year-olds, for example, 3-4-year-olds of disabilities and slow learning challenges, something that used to happen when the Honourable Prime Minister, now Prime Minister, was Minister of Education, but somehow fell on the wayside, and which I think the Ministry of Education has committed to bringing back into reality in the next year, I believe in the school term starting September 2023. All of this is important. So access to justice report, which the Honourable Member for St. George South spoke about, spoke to deficiencies in access to justice for persons with disabilities. And one of the proposals is that the legal aid scheme be widened to assist people with disabilities to access justice. But certainly, sir, the time will come for debate in the near future, hopefully before the end of this financial year, on the rights of persons with disabilities bill, sir. So we would have the opportunity to speak further on that, and clearly the provisions which will inform a better life for persons with disabilities, especially in terms of education, employment, health, access. So in employment, sir, the committee is recommending proposals for a quota system for businesses employing over a certain amount of persons. So we have to speak towards transformation and some radical changes if we are going to reduce this high unemployment figure of 90% for persons with disabilities. Because let's put it within context. The 2010 Housing and Population Census spoke towards 11,500 people with disabilities in this country. That represented 4% of our population at that time. I would put my head on the block, sir, to say that that figure is now significantly increased, and that percentage as well. Because since then, of course, we have people living longer. And the longer you live, the more likely it is that you're going to get some form of disability, with the prevalence of diabetes among black people in this country, sir, amputations, vision impairment, sir, Alzheimer's. Then, of course, we had the intervention of two health pandemics, sir, one much more serious than the other, but chikungunya regrettably left many people with disabilities, now have disabilities, sir, and even more so, COVID, sir. Those who were fortunate to survive, a lot of people, especially the elderly, who contracted COVID, regrettably now have some form of disability. I'm sure that all 30 of us in here could speak towards constituents in that position. So this is a significant percentage, and when you double that at least in terms of the caregivers, people who look after people with disabilities, you have a situation perhaps certainly of over 10% of people in this country who are directly affected by people with disabilities. Much more so, because you might have two caregivers in a lot of cases. So this is what has to inform the policy on persons with disabilities by this government. Since the establishment of this committee, as the Honourable Minister...
The Honourable Member has 2 more minutes.
Yes, sir, I thank you. As the Honourable Minister of People Empowerment has said, I have seen, sir, an increase in the public awareness of persons with disabilities, sir. So, for example, we had a collaborative effort between the Ministries of People Empowerment and the Ministries of Business and Entrepreneurship, an all-day session at the University of the West Indies on encouraging people with disabilities to get into their own business and entrepreneurship. You had the National Disabilities Unit having an entrepreneurial fair, which they're committed to having every 3 months or so. You have the private sector as well coming in, Barbados Entrepreneurship Foundation, Inc., that would have had sessions and would have gone out of its way to include people with disabilities in the sessions on entrepreneurship. So there must be greater sensitivity by the public on this issue. This is one of the key challenges that we face, and The committee has started that. Each member of the committee at various times engaged the media, went on brass tacks, people's business, one-on-one, sir, and engaged the public, and would have allowed, the public to call in and make their suggestions as well. So, sir, I again wish to praise the Rotarians for their efforts, sir. We could only hope that the play park is now set up and established in the shortest possible time, sir. I'm sure that the government, through the Ministry of Housing and the Ministry of Community Development, will assist in this venture, sir. But in the wider sphere, sir, we stand ready, sir, and certainly I stand ready after being involved in this cause for over 30 years, sir, to serve in whatever capacity I'm required to ensure that people with disabilities are given equality of opportunity in every aspect of life in this country and are allowed to realize their full potential and talents as every citizen of this country ought to be able to do. I thank you, sir.